Welcome to the Matchmaker Mentor Podcast, the show where aspiring and experienced matchmakers come to sharpen their skills, grow their businesses, and elevate the matchmaking industry. Your host is Arlene Washburn, an award-winning ethical matchmaking advocate, mentor, and industry innovator. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Matchmaker Mentor Podcast, where we help aspiring and experienced matchmakers build thriving, ethical, and sustainable businesses. I'm your host, Arlene Washburn, ethical matchmaking advocate and founder of the Love Pro Mastermind Academy, where we train and certify professional matchmakers around the world. And today we're talking about a topic that doesn't get nearly enough attention in our industry: how men process emotions, how they define masculinity, and what that means for the modern dating landscape. My guest today is Holly McCusker. Oh, I mispronounced that, Holly. I'm so sorry. McCusker, founder of Love Prescriptions, the Relationship Institute. She spent over a decade in the matchmaking and relationship coaching space, leading programs for one of the largest agencies in the U.S. before launching her own practice dedicated to helping men understand their emotional blueprint and embrace conscious masculinity. So, Holly, welcome to the show. I am so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Arlene.
Thank you. And I want to start with your story. How did you go from matchmaking to focusing exclusively on relationship coaching, especially with men?
Yeah. So I started as a matchmaker 10 years ago, and I had a lot of success with many of my clients, matching them, a lot of marriages, engagements, and things like that. But I was really more focused on those who didn't have the same amount of success and what was happening for them. And that's when I decided to get certified in coaching, and I started to coach my clients. And I saw a significant impact there, whether they walked away with their partner or really just a greater understanding of self. That was where the real gratification came from. So coaching became what was pivotal for me, and I think it accompanies matchmaking really well. So I still work a little bit in matchmaking, but mostly focusing on the coaching piece. So I did start my own business. I've worked with both men and women, but I have been drawn a lot towards men because I do feel like men are getting a bad rap out there, and oftentimes they just don't know where to go to get the tools and understanding of how to create greater awareness and things like that. So I've had a lot of success with my men and seeing some great transformation. And once they apply the skills and tools, I see them really showing up and having success in their relationships.
Was there a particular client or an aha moment that made you realize men needed this type of emotional support then, to make you want to transition from matchmaking over to coaching?
I mean, I think it's just like all of my clients seem to really have a much greater transformation in the coaching space. And when they had that transformation with coaching, I saw that really translated into their relationships and how they showed up. When it came to men, though, as you know, men sometimes have difficulty asking for help or seeking out assistance. So just having the opportunity to work with men and seeing that if it's available to them, they really appreciate the space to do the work and make the transformation.
It's funny. I totally agree with you because when I was a matchmaker, first and foremost, I wouldn't take a client who wasn't coachable. And when I started matchmaking, my clients were all men. And then I realized that you can't be front and center, or at least I couldn't. I was working with highly successful men, very accomplished, and they struggled to ask for that help. But when the help arrived, in a sneaky way, they were very, very much embracing it. And it's a shame that I don't know what we're doing to our boys and how we're raising them, that we don't allow them to have that full range of emotion, that we tell them not to cry, that they're not, just all this messaging that takes away from men being able to be vulnerable and to ask for help and all that. And I have a grandson now that I'm very careful what I say to him, because I don't think it's fair to men to have to deal with being stoic and not being able to express themselves. And what I love most about my husband is that he and I can be sitting there watching The Voice, both of us crying, and he's like a man's man and he's super masculine, but we can both cry and not be ashamed of it.
Absolutely. I mean, vulnerability is a beautiful thing, and it's what creates the connection in relationships. I think there are a lot of mixed messages out there about vulnerability, especially at a young age. As you said, don't cry, don't show emotions, be careful of this, that, and the other. But there's a difference between grounded and leaky vulnerability, right? So, where's the energy behind the vulnerability?
Hmm.
Because and that's sometimes like you see women saying, I want men to open up and be vulnerable, but then once they do, men are getting this message like that wasn't acceptable. But
Yeah.
often what I teach my men is there is a difference between how that vulnerability shows up. So if it becomes from a place of awareness where I'm sharing this with you because I'm aware that this impacts me, and I'm aware that this shows up in dating and relationships, and I'm doing something about it, that is grounded vulnerability, as opposed to when it comes from a victim energy of,
Mm.
poor me, and then it's expected for, then the woman feels like she has to fix or, you know, help this person. So there is a big difference between how the vulnerability is shared. So that's one thing we definitely focus on.
That's such a great tool and technique on how to express the vulnerability, because unfortunately we've all been indoctrinated into this kind of norm of, men have to be strong and they can't, show vulnerability. And a lot of women believe that too. And it's like, hey, this is a human being with skin and bones just like you and emotions just like you, except that they're suppressing it. And we all know what happens when people suppress their emotions. So I'm curious what you've seen over the last 10 years that has changed, because I have some thoughts about this, but I'd like to know what since you're in the trenches dealing with these men, like what have you noticed in the way that in how they date, how they approach dating, compared to how things were 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things happening right now in how they're approaching dating. And again, back to that confused state, right? So, not understanding always how to show up or what's expected of them. So, a lot of times we come from a performative place, right? Wearing those masks or leading with charm or money or things like that. So, I think a lot of what, because people are becoming more aware now, I think, it's kind of like getting back to authentic self. So, who am I underneath all of these conditioned beliefs and programming? That's where we talk about the emotional blueprint and what shaped you in the earliest years, right? The first 7 years of anyone's development is what shapes them. So, looking at what is your attachment style, because that's really big and going to show up in dating, and what are your origin wounds and how do those shape how you show up in dating, right? So I do think that there's a desire for this awareness. There's just where do we get it? How do we find it? And I think women are finding it a lot more easily. They're probably reading more of the books or watching more of the reels and things like that. So what I love is that being able to share that with men in sessions, and going back to what you said about feeling the emotions, just holding that space for those emotions that they were taught to hold in and suppress.
Well, it's funny because you and I spoke a while back, and my immediate question to you was, how do men feel about being coached by a woman, since you're not a man and you can't fully relate to the male experience? How do you build credibility and trust with these male clients?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's coming from a place of curiosity and not judgment. I need to feel like you're just curious as to what's going on and not judging them. So that's first. And I think really, the space of the um, healthy, curious space that safe space that I can provide for them, as opposed to sometimes what they're feeling in relationship and even in family dynamics, which is the judgment. So I think that that softness, they can start to open up once they build the trust, which fortunately has come pretty quickly in our sessions.
It's wonderful. I'm sure that when you reach out to someone and you have an initial conversation about coaching, that there's a lot of misconceptions. I'm curious, how do you work through that, and how are you able to convey? Because I was a coach as well as a matchmaker, and I felt that those two things went really hand in hand. And I would always explain, hey, I could teach you how to fish, or I could bring you fish. And, to me, I felt that we could have success, and I did have success on both ends. Some people were matched and had success and got into relationships. Some people were coached and got into relationships. And I know the value of what you do and how important this is, because unfortunately, they don't teach us this in high school. They don't teach us this in college. And frankly, even people with psych degrees don't learn about how to be in relationship and or dating, right? Dating and relationship being two different things. So I'm curious, like, what are the misconceptions when people come to you?
Yeah, and I do think there needs to be a normalization of things, right? Because it's about growing. It's not about fixing so much. It's about how can I grow and gain more self-awareness. The other piece I see a lot is, we do have to look back. We do have to look back at our emotional blueprint to understand how we are wired. And I notice with men, sometimes the resistance is, well, nothing happened in my childhood, like everything was great. So there needs to be, well, we're not here to blame anyone. We're not here to, blame your parents or your caretakers or anything like that. We're just here to really understand what shaped you. Because no matter what, nobody had a perfect childhood, and there are things that shape us. And going back to that pivotal 7 years, in those 7 years, we learned what love is, and we learned how we attach and things like that. So it's really important to know. So if you present it in a way of gaining knowledge and awareness, as opposed to trying to fix something.
I mean, that sounds really very much the way that I approached it as well. I always worked off of the science and the research and came at it with like a desire to kind of teach them a little bit about the science and the research so they can understand themselves. And I usually attracted really smart people. So I think that they appreciated that. It's like, okay, I'm not just asking you this for the sake of asking. Here's the science, here's the research. And when I would, try to guide them in trying to help change behavior, I would say, well, I'm not the bad guy. Here's the science, here's the research. I could always blame the science and the research. I'm curious, can you break down what you mean by the emotional blueprint?
Yeah. The
Okay.
core of the emotional blueprint is our attachment style. So how we learn to attach in early childhood with caretakers or our parents. And then our origin wounds, which we all have some type of wound, whether it's worthiness or trust, security, prioritization. Um, we all have one, and that's how we were shaped around the beliefs about love. And it can be just small, minor things that happen. It doesn't have to be big traumatic events. That, and then the nervous system is our safety, right? So then we're reacting, and sometimes we're getting dysregulated, often in conflict, things like that. So we have to understand now what's driving our nervous system responses, so we can learn to regulate that in relationship and dating.
And for matchmakers who are listening right now, I mean, I'm always a proponent of, you don't need to be perfect to get into a relationship. So if people think I got to work on myself and I have to get all this stuff done, but there are times where it is helpful to work through whatever emotional baggage or anything that's going on that's going to impede you from being successful in relationships. So, for a matchmaker listening, what are some signs that a potential male client may need emotional coaching before he's really ready for matchmaking?
I think if you see a lot of the masks, like the performance and
Mm.
how they're leading, if they're leading with their money or their looks or their charm, having a difficult time really sitting with their own emotions, outsourcing, needing to be accepted. A lot of people go into dating with a desire to be chosen as opposed to being in the driver's seat and making sure that you're choosing from your values.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and I think a lot of what we see out there, the checklist, the superficial checklist, that's often an indicator that there needs to be some inner work happening.
Absolutely. And then you hear this phrase about conscious masculinity, um, and it can be interpreted in so many different ways. What does it mean to you personally and professionally?
Yeah, I think it's really being grounded in presence. It's really coming back to self. Again, a lot of these things like not outsourcing your worth, being able to show up and be accountable to your actions, even if your partner or someone you're dating has an emotion to something you said or did, being able to take accountability, being consistent in your actions, not just saying you're going to do something, but showing up and doing it, and being able to be grounded in your vulnerability, not suppressed emotionally, and not being defensive. So being open. That's
Yeah.
a lot of what conscious masculinity is.
That's interesting. We run a referral network where daters join our database and they have the opportunity to meet the clients of professional matchmakers. But occasionally I can't help myself. If there's two daters in there, sitting in there, and I can see that there's great potential, even though I'm not a matchmaker, I will make the introduction. There's no cost whatsoever to join this thing. And so recently, I had a great guy, super like emotionally intelligent in our conversation, really great guy, tall, attractive, in a great financial state. And I had a woman in my database who I felt would be a good match. And so I immediately said to him, look, I'm not a matchmaker. This is not what we do, but I cannot help myself. I have to introduce you to this person. Are you open? And what I loved about him was he was like, yeah, I'm in. He didn't ask me for photos or anything. I mean, she's very attractive. So we put them together, and they've been seeing each other now for maybe 3 months. And I think I just got a notification from her that the relationship has gone in a different direction now. And so she's very upset. And what's interesting is that he reached out to me. He wanted to meet someone. So I introduced someone to him. But then he took like a really laid back approach, was not responding quickly enough, wasn't responding to her text. I suspect that he's probably an avoidant, and she will not admit to herself, but I believe she is an anxious attachment style. So she'll send a message via text and then not wait for a response and send another one and then another one. It's like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, I may have to introduce these people to Holly because I'm not coaching anymore. And it's a shame because I think that this was a really viable relationship, but that communication style is so different and they're long distance. Although they were both open to that and open to relocation and all that. So I don't know. What do you say about the scenario? It's so
Well, it definitely shows the signs of the anxious avoidant loop, and that's a really difficult dynamic to get out of or, work your way out of. So she may, if she thinks she's secure, she may be secure, but if he's avoidant, he potentially brought out that anxious side in her. And if she's double, triple texting, she's definitely showing signs of the anxious attachment. And if he's pulling away, he's showing those signs too. I think in her case, just expressing up front the needs of communication, like what and I always tell my clients this too is like, if you're not getting what you need, just share because you all have different styles of doing things, and someone may not be a big texter or want to talk on the phone. So just clarifying that right up front. So, what is your communication style? How often do you like to talk on the phone? And if it's not up to par and what you need and desire, share that without demanding. Just say, it would be nice. Do you think it's okay? Could you maybe text a little more during the day or follow up? But Yeah, I think the anxious avoidant loop is so common and it's so painful and it leads to a lot of breakups.
It's so frustrating. And, when he first approached us, I felt like, wow, you're good looking. He's got it all going on. I'm like, why are you reaching out? And I think the response was, I'm not really comfortable approaching women. But I feel like I have my husband has a really good friend who's a great guy also. And he's so laid back. And so I think that I'm asking you this because you coach men, and I'm sure you've encountered these guys who are just super laid back and don't put a lot of effort forward. I don't know why. Maybe it's avoidant, or maybe, I don't know, they're attractive, tall, wealthy, very capable, but don't really want to pursue. It's almost like they want to be pursued or something. I don't know. It's just such a
Yeah. I think too, just back to what you were saying about this man, like he probably presented as emotionally intelligent because he's intellectually understands all the concepts. But
Mhm.
in terms of embodying that and like regulating nervous system, because he probably got triggered by her anxiousness and that brought out his avoidance, right? So he may intellectually know, but hasn't truly embodied those things. And yeah, there is a lot of conversation out there around men not pursuing and things like that. But I think we've seen a pretty big shift in the masculine feminine dynamic and the polarity. So there's also on the women's side could be a lot of expectation, and men are just maybe shutting down a little bit when that expectation becomes too much. And what are they getting back in return? So where's the balance there? We have to be making sure we're balancing out and
Mhm.
having that polarity. So I think that's definitely happening. Women are, energies are not gender specific, but there tend to be a lot more masculine energy just out in society today. It's a lot of do, do, do. There's a lot less being.
Yeah, it's there's such a huge disconnect, and there's like the gender wars, and a political divide when it comes to men and women as well. Like, it's just been going downhill. What can we do as practitioners to get people back on track? Because we're not having as many marriages. The birth rate is very low. Our society is, and I mean, that's not just in the US. I think worldwide, there's a whole disconnect between men and women. There are countries that are struggling to try to get, in Japan and certain countries where they can't get the men to, get married. Um, I don't,
Yeah,
what's the
I mean, a lot of it just comes back to understanding why we're doing what we're doing. So a lot of it is protective, right? So if we're getting defensive or shutting down and all of that, we're protecting ourselves. And so it's really becomes getting very curious around why we're doing things, the way
yeah.
we're doing them, and what do we want in the end. If we want a relationship, we all have to be able to compromise. It can't be all one doing, and it can't, but it does definitely, we're all outsourcing. We're all
Mhm.
like looking externally for things. And I can't stress enough how the work has to be self first. We have to give the things to ourselves that we're asking for in a relationship first. Otherwise, we're just outsourcing. So working on that. I mean, it's not to say you can't work on that in a relationship too, but yeah. And I think the energy out there is not always great. There is a lot of there is a lot of on different sides. There's a lot of different sides. And I think, again, when we're putting up these walls or whatever, it's really those protectors. So we have to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? And whose
Mhm.
messages are we listening to as well?
Yeah, well, that is a very difficult thing right now because everyone has an algorithm. And so your phones are listening, your social media, everything, and it's trying to feed you more of the same, more of what you already want to hear. And so now you're in this echo chamber, and you're not listening outside of yourself or what I mean, your algorithm is feeding you, and that's really sad because everyone's listening to their own thing. I mean, we used to have the 6 o'clock news where everybody heard everything and you could decide for yourself what you felt was the right thing. Also, our journalists all had, more integrity in the sense that they were required to fact check. So now we just have a society being fed all kinds of things about masculinity, about feminism, or whatever, and it everybody's siloed. And what end?
Yeah.
That's
It's just creating such a divide and in so many ways.
Are you seeing a difference between millennial, Gen X, and Gen Z men in how they, how open they are to doing inner work or that kind of thing?
I mean, I want to say like maybe I am attracting the more open-minded, more curious, but I'm not seeing a huge difference. I think it just comes down to, sharing what's possible, really getting underneath all of these emotions um, and what the desire is. But I think we see the toxic traits in every generation, unfortunately, and we see the willingness to learn and grow as well. So I can't say, but I mean, I will say, because I have a 22-year-old daughter, and she's very frustrated with what's out there, and I think the messages that are being sent to that generation, it's probably more impactful.
Hmm. Um, how can women, especially matchmakers and coaches, encourage men to embrace, emotional growth, if that's what it takes? Or, I mean, I don't know how to describe it because, I love men. I have brothers. I had a father. I had, like I love men. I'm married to my husband. So I don't want to put men down in any way, but something's not working. But I also think it's on both sides. It's not just like, oh, the men are
Yeah.
broken or anything. It's just like, what can we do to bridge this gap to
Yeah.
get people to communicate and I don't know, turn things around?
Yeah. I think it is really just, do you want to keep having the same results over and over again? Or do you want to see a change? And if you want to see a change, you need to understand how to get there. And I think that is just breaking down what's happening in these dynamics, whether it be in dating or in relationship, what's going on, instead of continuously blaming one another for it. Each gender has to take a part in seeing their role in it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know some matchmakers. I mean, when I got into the industry, most matchmakers were working primarily with men as their clients. But I find now that that's shifted. And I think in part because women are struggling to meet the kind of men that they want to meet, whether it's education level, income bracket, or what have you. And women are now more educated and also gainfully employed and therefore can afford these services. And I guess my question is, why do you think they can't meet these guys on their own? Like, what's going on? I mean, you still have you have social media, you have the online dating platforms. Why do they need matchmakers? I mean, I've had beautiful women looking, that are accomplished and whatever, and looking for a mate, and they feel like they need a matchmaker.
Well, I think, they certainly can meet people organically, but it may be easier to have that go between to kind of suss out the qualities and values that they're looking for. So outsourcing that to a matchmaker can be really beneficial. I think, you know, when you experience one frustration after another, you definitely want to try a different route, and that could be the route to try. I think it's harder for people to approach in in person as well. It can be. I think there's that fear of rejection on both ends. And not to say that doesn't happen in matchmaking, because of course, that it's also there for that. But I do think it helps to have that support. And when you're going through that, trying to find a partner, as we know, it's not a done deal. It's not like an absolute that you're going to find your partner that way, but hopefully you're going to learn more about yourself in that process. So, yeah, I mean, I think turning to a matchmaker is a great option. I think also, if you don't want to take that route, then understanding how you're showing up out there. Again, going back to, are you leading with that scarcity mindset where you're already going out saying there's nobody available or emotionally available, and my checklist has to be all checked off in order for me to proceed with this relationship. So I think it's good to look inward at the process. Also, sometimes we put way too much expectation on the outcome of each date. And I like to tell my clients, just go in with first and foremost to be present on the date. You can't learn if there's connection if you're not being present. Let go of the expectation that it's going to be a certain outcome and know that whatever it is, you're going to learn more about yourself. So I think there's a lot we can do to just sort of shift the mindset, but it can be hard when you're in that coming from a place of frustration and you're trying to date. So again, that's where the work on self really needs to be there.
Yeah, I also think that, the ghosting and the breadcrumbing and all the different words that are being used today are very frustrating for people who are out there because there's such a plethora of people online, and therefore they jump quickly from one to the next to the next. And they leave people hanging, and I think, somebody meets someone, they get all excited, and then that they don't hear from that person. And I think the matchmaker in the mix eliminates that factor because the matchmaker is going to get feedback from both sides and figure out, or even sometimes talk people out of their own way to continue a relationship. I know I certainly did that for a few people who ended up in relationships and even marriage because I was able to sort of be in the middle, meddling like the yen to the
Yeah.
but it's really interesting because what I'm finding is that people are just giving up altogether and just staying alone
Yeah.
and feeling like I'm fine by myself. I don't even need a mate, especially women. Because I know I always say this to the guys: you make more money when you're married, you're happier, and you live longer if you choose the right partner. And marriage is very, very beneficial to men.
Yes.
So if any guys are telling you different, or if they're married and you're some young guy hearing that from a married guy, trust me, you're better off. That's not necessarily the case for women.
Correct. And, the studies have been done on that men benefit from marriage more than women do. And you're right about the trend. It's definitely trending in that area of women being okay being alone and not entering into marriage. So it's just a big dynamic shift.
Yeah, I don't know if this is still happening, but I know in the UK for a while there, it was becoming, encouraged that if a woman wants to have a child, just go have a baby, forget about having a partner. And, I respect people's decisions and everybody has agency, but I know as someone who grew up without a dad, not that my mom had us without him, but, they got divorced. And it's not a healthy place to come from. I
Yeah.
think it's nice to have both parents, and the people who grew up with both parents and decide, to do things like that, or perhaps they're encouraged to. I don't know. For someone who grew up without my dad, I wish he would have been there, and I think it would have made a difference in my life.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. I mean, even if you aren't like you didn't have that relationship, there's still that need to know who the other part of you is, who else shaped you or formed you, right? Because we those genetics still follow through even if they're not present, right? So we have parts of our lineage in us and we need to understand who we are based on that, right? So and I think we definitely need to have an understanding of both energies as well.
I think another thing I did a lot of work in the divorce space when I was in matchmaking, and I found a lot of frustration with men who had gone through divorce, who were being alienated from their children, who lost a lot of money in that transaction, and maybe sometimes got the short end of the stick because the courts favored women. I don't know if that's still the case. And so there was a lot of resentment and that kind of thing. Are you working with people who have gone through those experiences?
Absolutely, yeah. And I utilize a lot of, I created a breakup grief course, and I utilize a lot of the information from that course with men who've experienced this because, when you can't get to that fifth stage of the grief process, the acceptance and understanding of why all this happened. And of course, as you mentioned, there can be unfairness.
Mhm.
Um, when you don't get to that stage of the grief process, then you're carrying on those beliefs and feelings and projections into the next relationship. So we definitely work toward an understanding of what the relationship served and even the great parts, because obviously there were great parts to the relationship and you have to remember that. Also taking away the belief that relationship ending is failure, right? It served its purpose and not all relationships are going to last forever. So, taking a look at what they gained from the relationship, and certainly their children are a big factor, right? And so, how can we shift that energy of resentment and anger toward growth and knowing too that you're a role model for your children and your ability to shift that dynamic shifts it for your children too. Because if you continue to carry that resentment forward, then your children will do the same. So knowing that you have put your power into changing that dynamic.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's, like intellectually it's hard. It's easy to understand that. But then when 60% or more of divorces are filed by women, where all of a sudden men might be oblivious to what's coming and all of a sudden they get blindsided with divorce papers or a woman asking for divorce. Obviously, we're talking about, heterosexuals here. And they are not expecting it, and now their whole life is upended, and these things happen, the children, all the things. And so it's very, very challenging, and then to have to go back into the into dating, and especially if you've been married for a long time. I know I went through that after 17 years going back into dating. That's when online dating was started out back in the day. It's hard. It's very challenging.
Yeah, and it becomes harder if you can't sit with those feelings because they're so overwhelming, right? And if we don't sit with the feelings, they stay in and get suppressed, and then they come out in other ways. So that's another thing that is really big with my coaching is that I get men to really sit with the feelings and understand like a feeling can last 90 seconds. Emotion can last 90 seconds if you allow it to be allowed to sit with it. But if you try to fight it or suppress it or, create a story around it, it doesn't go through the body. So really that's where the processing comes in. Processing the emotions from the past relationship so you don't carry them into the next one. And as we know, sitting with emotions is extremely tough. That's why we have so many people distracting themselves with all sorts of things, right? So the power in that sitting with emotion is huge. And I know we're just not taught to do that, right? As children either. So that's a big one. And I love it when men are able to open up and cry and like really understand where that first message came from and, why they're not able to feel the feelings. And often that feeling that comes up through that divorce or breakup is something that is occurred earlier. It's attached to something earlier in life. So it creates an even bigger impact.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point. The avoidance just makes it perpetuate instead of processing and releasing and looking for the gifts, looking for the message or something that you needed to learn and to be able to move on. Tell me about love prescriptions. How did that how did you come up with the concept? What does your, like what exactly, what does that entail? I know you have a program that you do for men. Is it one-on-one? Is it a group?
Mhm. Yeah. So Love Prescriptions, I built Love Prescriptions in February of 2024 after working in the matchmaking industry and building a coaching program for an agency. I came out on my own to kind of like the sky's the limit. I wanted to reach as many people as possible. So, but really currently focusing on men. And the recent course that I built is called the 5P process to conscious masculinity, which
Can you
takes,
repeat that? I'm losing the ending of your words.
yes, the course and coaching program that I just built is called the 5P process method to conscious masculinity, which takes men through 5 steps. First is pausing to regulate the nervous system, understand the importance of just pausing, taking those breaths, maybe if needing to shake it out, but just sitting with the emotion to let it go through. And then the next step is process. So understanding, going back to those attachment wounds and origin attachment styles and origin wounds, to really understand your blueprint, to understand what shaped you, how you show up in relationship. Because when you're dysregulated, and you're in that conflict, you want to be able to pause, and then you want to gain an understanding of what's coming up for you. So if you're in flight mode, you might be avoidant and you're like, I'm out of here, I can't process this. Or if you're in freeze, you're shutting down. So really understanding what that all means and giving them the tools to regulate, process, and then protect. So looking at ways that men have been protecting themselves, the masks they wear, the boundaries that maybe are not healthy boundaries, and the people pleasing, right? Because we see that a lot with people trying to just tell you what you want to hear, and again, suppressing the true emotions. So what are we doing to protect ourselves? And then we have the provide. So teaching them, moving forward, we're teaching them how to lead with integrity, how to show up in their conscious masculinity, how to lead with grounded vulnerability, how to show up, how to hold space, and how to ask for what they need too in relationship. And then the last P is pursue. So then we teach them moving away from their checklist and looking at relationship core values. So what are your relationship core values? Because that's how you want to be looking for your partner, not through these superficial qualities. So and once we really identify the relationship core values, I always turn it back on them to make sure that they show up in that value, because you don't want to be asking for something that you're not doing yourself, because again, that's looking outside yourself to fill it.
Mm.
So if there's something they truly value, but they're not showing up in that value, how can we work on that? How can we work toward that? So that is the 5-step method. And I've been working one-on-one with men using that process. So it's been really great. And now we're going to move into a group coaching dynamic to see how that, I think community is going to play a nice role, and having that support and seeing other men show up in grounded presence and vulnerability. I'm really excited to see that.
I mean, that program sounds incredible and very transformational. I'd be curious to see how things go, because my experience has always been that guys don't tend to do these group things. Although more recently, I've noticed some movements with men like that join these certain organizations, typically run by men, where they go away camping or whatever, and they do all these different exercises, and they're able to show their vulnerability and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think what you're offering sounds amazing and so needed. And I love all those P's that you mentioned, because it makes a lot of sense. Um, have you had results in terms of transformations that you've seen with your clients thus far when you're doing this one-on-one?
Yeah, I've seen, I can say that about 90% of the men who've followed through with this work are now in a committed relationship.
That's incredible
Yeah.
and believable, because I can see how this can lead into being feeling more authentic and really being able to be in a relationship, because I think that's part of the problem, is that the people pleasing, which is very common with men. I don't think people realize how much men try to please the women, make them happy and this, that, but not be authentic about it, and therefore feel resentful and suffering and not be able to communicate their needs and stuff like that, because they feel like only the women can communicate their needs. Like there's just, it's kind
And
of
then
like
it doesn't build trust in the relationship because the woman can't trust the man to be transparent in their needs and feelings. And as we know, everything that gets suppressed comes up eventually. So
how can matchmakers integrate your framework or refer clients who need your help before matchmaking begins if they feel that someone really could use some of this work, so they can have more success? Because, matchmaking is a pretty significant investment. And I think getting someone relationship ready, I think, is really nice before they start the matchmaking.
yeah, they can certainly reach out to me. I do work with matchmakers and their clients. We do have a discovery call to see if we're a good fit, see if they're ready for coaching and open. As you know, they have to be open to doing it. And then the success has been wonderful with these, and it helps the matchmaker because then their clients are in relationship and they're not continuously searching for matches. So they can reach out and we can do a discovery call. There's also the group coaching option, the workshop that I'm going to be having in a couple of weeks. It's free. They can send their clients or their members to the workshop, and from there see if the coaching piece will work for them, whether it be group or one-on-one.
And we'll be sure to include all of that in the show notes. Um, Finally, what's one message you want every matchmaker or dating professional to remember after today's conversation?
I think this is just what came to the top of my head, so I'll say it. But I think, leading with curiosity instead of judgment. I think we all think we know where people are coming from, but we don't. So just leading with curiosity when you're interviewing candidates or new clients to truly try to understand how certain things came to be for them, as opposed to making judgments about it, because that's going to allow them to open up more.
I love that. I think curiosity, not just for the matchmakers and not having judgment, but everyone and anyone in any relationship, not just with a significant other. If you lead with curiosity, then you are able to give people the benefit of the doubt and not judge immediately, because you're like, okay, wait, I'm curious, why this or why that. So I love that. That's such a great message.
And the same with self. I always say that, like, get curious with yourself because there's a lot of self-judgment.
Oh
But
yeah,
when you get curious with yourself, you can offer yourself compassion as opposed to being
I
hard.
love that. Yeah, why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking like this? Like
Yeah.
that's so good. Yeah. Just a quick note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Love Pro Mastermind Academy, where aspiring and experienced matchmakers come to get trained, certified, and supported in building ethical, profitable, and sustainable businesses. If you are ready to turn your passion for connecting people into a profession or elevate your existing matchmaking company with structure, strategy, and systems, visit lovepromastermind.com to learn more about our certification and mastermind programs. Holly, thank you so much for this powerful and necessary conversation. You've helped us see, that men's emotional growth isn't just about personal development. It's really about creating healthier, more conscious relationships for everyone. And to learn more about Holly and her work, visit loveprescriptions.com and connect with her on Instagram and LinkedIn at Love Prescriptions. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the Matchmaker Mentor podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and share it with another matchmaker or coach or dating professional who would benefit from the insights shared on this episode. And until next time, I'm Arlene Washburn, reminding you that ethical matchmaking isn't just a business, it's a movement. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Matchmaker Mentor podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with fellow matchmakers and friends. For more resources, training, and inspiration, visit lovepromastermind.com and follow us on social media. Remember, matchmaking isn't just a career, it's a calling. Let's keep building connections, changing lives, and growing together. Until next time, stay inspired and keep matching.